If ever you needed a strong argument for the 20th century being one of the craziest centuries, look no further than a book. What else? It's The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, published 1984. Milan Kundera! And it features such characters as Thomas, a really good surgeon, it turns out. Also, a bit of a man-slut. There's also Teresa, who is Thomas's young wife.
She was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar.
Also does some pretty badass photojournalisting. There's Sabina, an artist, Thomas's closest friend, helps Teresa get that photojournalisting job, and is also Thomas's mistress. It gets better. There's also Karenin, Thomas and Teresa's transgender dog, literally a bitch with a male name. And then there's Franz, who is Sabina's other lover, and he's like a intellectual coward type. He's married to a lady called Marie-Claude, who's got big Lady Macbeth energy. And he is the father of, with Marie-Claude, the father of Marianne, who you would totally slap too.
Yes, you would.
Czechoslovakia, country literally doesn't exist anymore. In 1918, it came into existence by declaring its independence from another country that doesn't exist anymore, Austria-Hungary. But this was not the first time that Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. The first time it ceased to exist was between the years 1939 and 1945. And if you want to know why, I'll tell you at the very end of this video. Czechoslovakia reformed in 1948, and it ceased to exist again in 1989 when some bricks fell off walls. Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being is set in 1968 in what's now called the Prague Spring, which is when the then Soviet Union, another country that doesn't exist anymore, invaded the Warsaw Pact countries. I have heard so many people tell me that this is their favorite book, and I have equally heard so many people tell me that Milan Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being, it just doesn't live up to the hype. It's also a name that I've been hearing for like the longest time, but I had no idea what it referred to. Like I had never heard those words in that order. Unbearable lightness of being, unbearable likeness of being, unbakeable lifeness of beans. Anyway, in this video, I'm mainly gonna talk about the style of the book, and then its substance. So stick around until the end to see if I misunderstand what I mean by substance and to find out why Czechoslovakia ceased to exist between the years of 1939 and 1945. This is a no-spoiler review of Milan Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Like, share, subscribe, I love.
So Milan Kundera, he actually passed away quite recently, July 2023, and he was born in 1929 in that country that doesn't exist anymore, Czechoslovakia. And at the age of 18, he joins the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. And so that would be 1947. But then just 3 years later, he was expelled from the party. And then 8 years later, in 1958, he was allowed back in. Then 10 years after that, what happens? 1968, Prague Spring. Yes, thank you very much. And he gets fired from the film faculty and he goes into exile to France in 1975. The Unbearable Lightness of Being, written less than a decade after that, is the first book he wrote in exile. That all makes him sound quite political, but he always maintained he was a novelist, not a politically motivated writer. But inevitably, as is only natural, political themes they're ever present in his work, even if they're just broadly there on like a philosophical level. So this is interesting. He actually wrote Unbearable Lightness of Being in 82, but in French. But he didn't publish it until 84. Then in the same year, it was translated into English, published through excerpts in the New Yorker, and it wasn't until 1985 that it was actually published in its original Czech. The style. The Unbearable Lightness of Being literally just follows Thomas, Teresa, Sabina, Franz, Karenin, just living their lives from what happens to be the Prague Spring onwards. And I say happens to be because of the book's substance. substance, which I'll get onto later, I honestly reckon it would still be the same book wherever it's set. It just so happens to be set in communist uprising because that's what Milan himself was experiencing at the time. Let me just say quickly, very good, 5 out of 5, read it. So the style, it's so funny. Immediately, as I was reading it, I just thought of Zack Braff. I don't know how true this is, but I found so many cultural artifacts that we see all the time now in like art and content. And like so many of these artifacts are like present in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, more than would be natural. This is not an exhaustive list. 1, Manic Pixie Dream Girl, or at least the progenitor to the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Teresa kind of has that vibe, maybe even Sabina. 2, the laconic, omniscient, witty narrator, which elevates as a device the irony of this book. Think Fight Club, think maybe even John Green or Scrubs, Zach Braff. 3, self-aware, or with a historically self-aware perspective and characters, more internal wise than external plot. Again, I'm thinking Zach Braff stuff. 4, the I know it's bad for me, but I'll do it anyway, but it's okay because I'm self-aware. That person's in this book. 5, random things that become meaningful because of whatever meaning the characters imbue in it. There's a lot of that in this book. 6, kind of awkward. That which I unconsciously created as a kid is now the thing that is trapping me as an adult, as an idea. That's in this book. And yes, a lot of those things are tropes that you would find across all art forms, right? But the reason why I say it's part of Kundera's style, the style, is because, first of all, the occurrence of these tropes are unnatural. There are a lot of tropes. And also I feel like he uses the tropes to make his point about the substance of the book, which I'll get to later. Okay, hear me out. Overall, I don't get the impression that writers sit down and they look at a massive menu of tropes and then they pick and choose what they want to put in their stories. Okay, maybe some people do. Maybe some just naturally want to explore certain types of tropes like damsel in distress or whatever. And these tropes just keep coming up whenever these writers try to write. But there's something about Kundera's writing that feels very postmodern. I hate using that word. Feels even deconstructed, and not just because of 1960s communism and exile, whatever. Like I say it's postmodern and deconstructed because there's like a irreverence to his writing, like a humor, an acknowledgement of the absurdity, like a reckoning with that grand irony. Like he seems aware of the self-important political writer trope, and then he tries to subvert it. Like he's aware of those tropes I mentioned earlier, and instead of relying on them to tell his story or them just coming up psychologically as he writes, he chooses the ones he wants only to subvert them. And I really hope I'm making sense here, because I imagine Kundera is the sort of writer who wasn't precious about his work in general, the way some writers are. And I feel like Kundera understands and is willing to play with the form because all that is in service of the truth. And that's not to say he wasn't serious about his work. I just don't get the impression he was an ass about it. And all of that's his style.
The style.
But maybe, just maybe, I'm chatting shit. Great film, by the way. I saw it last week and I was genuinely like, what am I watching? The substance of Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being. Like, what is it all about? The Unbearable Lightness of Being is very much about how absurd life is and how every moment in your life is literally unique. It is only ever going to happen once. Every moment so far that you have lived through has contributed to you becoming who you are. And it's all one fortuitous act after another fortuitous act. Look, just as an aside, I genuinely believe that great art reveals the truth, capital T truth. The truth is ineffable, it's indescribable, you know it. Once you experience it, you get like goosebumps, you get like a feeling of, oh my God, everything makes sense. Like you've just solved the cosmic riddle or you've been let into the joke, but you can't remember the answer and you're feeling giddy. And the truth, the capital T truth, is sublime. The Unbearable Lightness of Being touches on that sublime. It reveals an aspect of that capital T truth. You know, I think it does that in part because like Kundera was replying to Camus' question. So you know in the Myth of Sisyphus, that cornerstone essay by Albert Camus on what ended up becoming called the existentialism. Again, very Zack Braff. But there's basically, a guy called Sisyphus. He's been doomed to roll a boulder up a hill all day, every day. Once it gets rolled to the top, he just has to watch it roll back down again. He repeats this tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, for eternity. And Camus used the Sisyphean analogy to describe our lives as humans. Because all Greek mythology aside, the question Camus asks is, how can Sisyphus continue doing that same thing forever and ever? How can we live our lives day in and day out when every day just feels like rolling up a hill just to see it roll the fuck back down again? So Camus' answer to that question is that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Milan Kundera builds on that idea. He transplants it from its Greek setting to 20th century Europe in The Unbearable Lightness of Being. He fleshes it out. He opposes it to something like Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. Life happens, so much life happens. Prague Spring, World War II, communism, Hiroshima, marriage, kids, money, destitution, betrayals, whatever. And maybe we even get to a point where we can rationalize all the shit that happens to us, or blame someone, at least for all the shit that happens to us. Or if we're lucky, we get to be grateful, because whatever happens, we still have to wake up tomorrow. Kundera's answer to Camus' question, he opposes his answer against the idea of eternal recurrence, which is a massive topic, so I am not going to get into it here. Like literally tons of words have been written on, not necessarily about Nietzsche versus Kundera, but certainly of eternal recurrence versus cosmic coincidence. What Kundera argues is that in a world where things eternally recur, just imagine like some beads. You start off on one end and it recurs until you perfect it, till you get to the end of the sequence, right? In a world where things eternally recur, what is the meaning of doing something if it just is going to eternally recur? Like, what's the point in being a middle bead if the end bead is the best bead, so to speak? And Kundera argues that, look, if you have an eternally recurring worldview, everything becomes meaningless. Yeah, you have like some kind of grand meaning of perfecting your life or whatever. Your day-to-day pushing a rock up a hill becomes meaningless. Because you did it yesterday, you're going to do it tomorrow, and you're going to keep on doing it tomorrow. Kundera argues that everything in life is meaningful because they are insignificant, because they are not replicable. They are, in essence, anomalous. They're precious. They only happen once. And most of the things in our life, they literally only happen once. And when they do happen, they happen because a chain of coincidences have led to them happening. It's literally cosmic coincidence. Like, what if we were to just get so many insignificant things pervade our lives? Our lives are made up with anomalous singular events. Awareness of that fact, or even just beginning to reckon with it, should set us free, not shock us into being static and dumb. If we get our lives of just pushing rocks up hills has no inherent meaning. It has no inherent meaning. We could do anything. If we get that, Kundera argues that that should set us free. It should take the shackles off us. And that freeness feels like giddiness, a vertiginous feeling, a lightness. It's a feeling of lightness about, around, towards, a feeling of lightness about who I am being. I can do anything. It's all meaningless and it's all beautiful. And I can do anything. And now, giddy, free, and unbound, my life is no one else's but mine to live.
Let's just wrap.